everybody, welcome to the July 25th, 2025 edition of News from the Front Lines of Business by D.W. Huff Consulting. I'm David Huff, CPA, personal financial specialist as well. Another crazy week here of all the celebrities passing away. Hulk Hogan, Ozzy, Malcolm Jamal Warner. I guess the hope there is that, I say things come in threes, and that's the end of the bad news for a while. So hopefully that's true. But anyway, here we are again. So another week has gone by, so we always want to try and share some information from discussions we've had with clients along throughout the course of the week. So the first up is TikTok. So we always see a lot of crazy stuff on those feeds on the the For You page and everything. So it's worth looking at this again because it seems like more and more self-professed tax planning gurus keep popping up. So if you've seen any of these people, they always kind of talk a good game, but it's getting so like the wild west out there as far as the people who can put stuff out there that sounds kind of legitimate. This whole thing with bring your taxes down to zero. One of these webinars we saw is this pathway to zero, and they go to some great lengths to show some examples of ways that don't always fit every tax situation, and naturally there's always a class that's involved and something like that, but it's just like everybody. So now we down from this guy Pierre Carton Dennis at the top normally has pictures of him with a Lambo and pretty good presentations. I think if you pick and choose what things you listen to, it might be useful. Down to just regular overweight guys with baseball caps just touting their courses. So I know it might sound kind of self-serving since we also provide this strategy, but I guess I'll just throw that out there to you as you're watching videos that pop up and you see something that you might be considering spending money on. Just caution here. So take a look at these common red flags. One size fits all solution. So that's a very common bad thing we see in a lot of things, where to make it look like everybody can take advantage of some of these benefits, and especially in the real estate area, that's one area where it's not always that easy to do, and you see that thrown around quite a bit. Look for the person that is actually licensed. So when you see these fly-by-night sales type organizations, I would be leery, because if somebody hasn't invested the time to obtain education, certifications, and just general credibility from doing the work for a number of years prior to now, probably not somebody you want to really listen to that much, in my opinion. And just take a look at the kind of things that pop up on their social media pages. So So if you see the guy with the Lambo and the personal, the private jets and that kind of thing going on, maybe they really do own that stuff, but a lot of times you find those pictures of staged with rented assets. And of course, there's always this push where they have a free class that eventually leads up to some really expensive mastermind groups that do a good job of selling you on the sizzle, so as opposed to the steak, and getting you to pay more money down the line. So and of course, anybody says you can write off everything and pay zero taxes legally, that's typically kind of far-fetched, I would say. You can get the number down pretty low, but I would say you're never going to have every single year where you got it down to zero tax. At some point, when you're doing accelerated depreciation and some of these other strategies, at some point you got to pay the piper. So as a way of kind of, I guess, balancing that and optimizing that is really the key. So as always, be careful with that kind of stuff. All right, so next up we had a discussion regarding lending money to your business. So we know it's a common thing with a small business where revenue might not be as high as you need to be, or you have some sort of expansion coming up and there's not enough money in the company banking account to pull it off. Sometimes you can't obtain business financing like you would want to, and you as the owner have to put some money back into the company, right? So there's tax and legal reasons why capital contribution versus a loan sometimes provide better benefits, but in general, I would say loaning money to the company is normally going to be the best solution. normally. So everything's a little bit different, but we got to be careful and make sure we're doing it the right way. So we don't want to be, say, just paying company expenses with a personal card and then making a journal entry to capture that. We really, in order for it to be the best possible scenario from a liability standpoint, tax standpoint, and just everything, we want to make it look like a loan, like you're really similar to if you would have went to a bank and borrowed $50,000. So we want to see some kind of written document that says, I, as the owner, am contributing $50,000 to XYZ company. We are going to assign it an interest rate. We're going to document that, and even though it might be you signing it as the owner, I guess I don't know necessarily a signature is necessary in that case, but some kind of written document that lays out the terms of this transaction and just kind of clarifies what's going to be happening. So we want to make sure that these considerations, that it is written, a formal document, put it in a file somewhere. Like I said, the signature is probably not that big of a deal since it's going to be you on both sides of it. But we do want to assign an interest rate too, so we don't want to just kind of willy-nilly, start paying stuff to yourself and calling it interest versus principal, because there's a lot of different ways to structure these things. Your normal loan amortization table is going to be a certain amount applied to principal and interest with each payment. So that's one way to do it. There's plenty of templates out there to let you do that. You can do interest only with a lump sum repayment at the end. That's probably a more common way I would typically see it with a small business. But in any of those scenarios, you got to assign an interest rate to the loan amount, and it's got to be reasonable, because if you go with too high of an interest rate, there's a possibility that the IRS might look at that as though it wasn't sort of a disguised dividend. If it's too low, it might look like a capital contribution, which you might not always want. So reasonable rate. So SBA has some guidelines there, as well as just a Google search. I'm sure you'll find some local banks that nearby that are paying a certain interest rate, and they'll advertise that rate for their commercial loans. You could use that, as well as probably look at the IRS's website, because they have rates that they use for, like, when you owe tax and you're making payments, they'll have some rates out there. So if you want to get some kind of guideline for what's reasonable, those are 3 places to look and choose a rate and stick with it. So if you're going to be interest only payments, you take that rate, that annualized rate, divide it by 12 to get the monthly rate and use that as the basis for payments if you're going to go interest only, or you plug it into your amortization table in Excel if you're going to do a regular type payment where you're making a payment every month, and some part is interest and some part is principal. But at the end of the day, use something reasonable and stick with a reasonable repayment schedule. So you never want to have no repayments. That's always starts to look like a capital contribution as opposed to a loan, and could mess everything up. So whatever you do, it's got to look kind of like it would be with any kind of commercial loan, with a repayment and interest rate and that kind of thing. So do that. Let us know any questions as usual, and keep you out of trouble. All right. So on the investment front, we had some discussions. Because as you know, when we do our investment work and we try to build portfolios, we always try to construct things in such a way with our investments that at some point in time we can start taking money out of that investment. And we like dividends, so there's a whole bunch of reasons why we prefer to have a dividend-based withdrawal strategy versus having to sell stocks. A little bit beyond the scope of this video today here, but as we're talking about the specifics of how to generate dividend income, a couple different schools of thought, versus the high yield dividend fund compared to like a normal dividend fund. So what we're talking about here is like a high yield fund. So we look at some kind of side-by-side comparisons, and this typical yield level on the high yield will be somewhere between 4 and 10 versus the regular we have at 2 to 4. So, I guess for somebody who's not really, up to date on how things work with these companies, the dividend yield, when it's expressed here as a percentage, basically looks at the dividend. So if somebody's paying, a $1 a year dividend and their stock price is 100, the yield's 1%. If that same company pays a 10% yield, it's 10%. So basically, they just express the dividend payment as a percentage of the current stock price. So the yield can go up as a percentage by a bunch of different ways. If the stock price goes down, now that yield becomes higher, right? So And that's usually the way it works. Usually what we see is that a company that's now paying a high yield, when it's expressed as a percentage, usually something's going on with the stock price that's driving it down. Might be temporary, who knows. So I guess the knee-jerk reaction when you're trying to build dividends, I'm gonna buy that, go up with the highest yield possible. That might not always be the most sustainable way, because something might be going wrong with the company that's generating a high yield at in the future. When we look at the sustainability here, they might not be able to keep that going indefinitely because they have some kind of problem, and it's reflected in the stock price already. So that might not be a great long-term holding. So in a case like that, you might be better off with more of a your long-term stable dividend pay that's only throwing off 2 or 4%, but they can pay it indefinitely out into the future. So there are two different schools of thought there. So you got to be careful. Sometimes the companies might recover and it's fine, sometimes not. So so that's some considerations there when constructing a dividend-based income plan. So reach out to us. Obviously, we definitely, as we mentioned before, we have our financial planning on. We deal with these investments and can help you choose. But I guess higher yield, I guess, is not always better, because if the yield doesn't last for a long time and you can't rely on it, it could really just throw your whole financial plan into kind of a tailspin when these things kind of come apart. So there's reasons for both the high and the regular yield in a portfolio, but I'll just mention that. Additionally, if you want to learn more, so we research things throughout the week. I don't know how many hours I spend just looking at other strategists and kind of what their recommendations are. This is a guy here. He has a website with a dividend tracking program that tracks your investments and kind of helps you plan dividends. Not endorsing them, this is just somebody I watch, but I just want to mention that he did have a more detailed discussion of this exact topic recently on YouTube. So if you want to get into the weeds a little bit, he goes into way more detail and into why a high yield portfolio is not always the best answer and how he would go about doing it. So once again, not an endorsement of this guy, but very good statistics within the website if you want to kind of learn some more. All right, so in case you missed it section, tax on capital gains related to the sale of a home. So the big beautiful bill is now passed, and everybody's kind of adapting to the new rules. But now there's been some more talk thrown around a little bit by President Trump about eliminating capital gains when you sell your house. So the way it is now, that replaces the current. Well, if it comes to see the light of day, it will replace the current rule under Section 121, where if you live in your primary residence for 2 out of the last 5 years, you get to exclude $250,000 of gain if you're single, $500,000 if you're married filing jointly. And that's been the rule for a long time. There's been no sort of inflation adjustment for that. So depending on where you live, those gains might be all the gains there are, and there's no tax. In some cases, it just reduces it somewhat. So no matter what, we need to it's been recognized that we need to look at this rule a little closer and modify it in some way. But as always with this stuff, there's a lot of criticism. Mostly here is that if we have this deal where capital gains are now no longer a consideration because they're tax free, what does that do to the housing market? So there's talk that people who may have been sitting on a house and had no interest in selling it because of the tax hit might now put those things on the market and possibly drive down prices somewhat. Critics also claim that this is only going to benefit wealthier individuals, and I would argue both sides of that too, because of the fact, like I mentioned before, that this $250,000 or $500,000 gain is not indexed for inflation. I think if there were no gain on home sales at all, it would also help some of these middle income people as well, because they would now no longer have to worry about it at all. You look around the real estate listings lately, it's especially more, I guess, larger cities, it's pretty easy to find situations where there might be a gain that exceeds these exclusions as they are now. So maybe not the people on the lowest income scale would benefit, because their gain, I think, would still fall within the exclusion. But typically, definitely the middle and the higher income people would definitely see a benefit. So anyways, that's that. So closing thought for the week. As you know, I'm always talking about just reading up on philosophy lately, and Stoicism has been one of the things that's I've been reading regularly. And I saw this meditation here. So this is a book by Ryan Holiday. So I showed that in the last slide, but yeah, we got it. So it's a daily reflection. You look at it and read it, and sometimes it's relevant to what you got going on, sometimes it's not. But this one from a couple of days ago jumped out at me. Receive without pride, let go without attachment. So the story in particular here is a going back to the one of these wars in the Roman Republic times, and Julius Caesar was in charge, and but his adversary in this thing was put Cato in charge of the navy. He's obviously some prestigious rank, and not long ago not long after that he received some criticism. Demotes the guy, puts somebody else who's more politically in favor in charge. But Cato, the guy that's in charge, just kept doing his job the same way. So not that he didn't care about being demoted, but he just kept on doing his thing the same as he would have if he was in charge of the Navy or just a guy rowing a boat. So he did the same thing. So that kind of made me think of a time when when I had some issues. With a higher ranking position, and all of a sudden it kind of dried up and didn't work out like I wanted to. But at the end of the day, I kind of did this too, and I would just throw that out there to you to look at this example. No matter what happens to you, keep being you. Don't get mad about things and react negatively, because that always blows up on you. You could have anger affecting you and getting you too distracted from what you're supposed to be doing in life. So I'll throw that out there to you as we end this video here and end the week. So I'll look forward to seeing y'all out here next week.